Well, in this last module, we have going to focus on the ideas of what do we mean by standard work. We've talked about it a lot, and the question is, how do we do it from the start? And this is very often a big question for people. How do we actually begin with standard work? Taiichi Ohno said, start with a lenient definition. So what does that mean? So how can we actually build up a standard work system? So defining standard work activities, what does it mean? Well, standard work is the most efficient way to produce a deliverable that meets the requirements for quality at the desired rate of production within a targeted budget at the lowest total cost. So that seems like actually an awful lot wrapped into that decision. It breaks work into sequential elements and defines tasks to be performed using checklists, sets the quality criteria to be assessed in a test procedure to see how well we've done, as well as performance thresholds, what are the minimum, and the boundary level limits for how we're going to control the system. So workers have to be trained, given the tools, permitted decision rights, as we've talked before, and then they have to understand cycle time, talk time, and standards for managing work in process inventory. So all of these are components of building a standard work system. Now, when we build a work instruction, they should tell people how to do the work correctly. And that means it must be credible, usable, accessible, and consistent. So credible means workers can trust the instructions. They're kept current and rigorously upgraded by all employees, including the supervisors are involved. They have to be usable, they have to be clear in the language of the workers. If there are multiple languages need to be provided. So maybe 3 or 4 languages may exist in certain work communities. Sometimes, ideally, it's a single page and maybe with photographs. So language is not necessary. If we can clearly describe what's going on in pictures or in simple videos, that is usable. These standard work instructions need to be accessible. They have to be located where the workers use them, and you're easily, like within seconds, accessible so they can retrieve them and then remind themselves how to do the job that they are actually currently doing. And they have to be consistent. And this means when we train the workers on how to do the job, that the standard work instructions also have to follow that same training. So we have to identify what information is necessary, where the tools are, what they've done, how we have the standard settings for control of equipment, as well as specific job instructions. So there are different forms that we can use. So these can be sort of this extreme level of forms. Many of the Japanese companies use very, very detailed forms for how you are following instructions, but they also have one basic detailed set for workers in training and then a simplified set for workers who have passed competence examinations and have had experience in being supervised in the conduct of their work. Now, work standardizations applies to this SDCA cycle. And what we want to do is arrange work activities into standard ways of working and then evaluate the work against the standards in the check step to say, are we actually complying? And we continue this work management process routinely in how our organization works. So the very beginning is we make a rule. You've got to assume that things are a mess. That's what Taiichi Ohno says. So we're dealing with dirty data in messy processes. You have to assume that it's a mess. So we have to first make the rule. And so the supervisor guides the workers in defining the rules, finding methods that create standard work. The workers then collaborate with colleagues to define their job, and this is facilitated by the supervisor. The second step is to teach the rule. And this is the supervisor responsibility. Train the workers in the agreed upon rules and make sure they're capable to execute the rules in the real world environment. The workers participate in the training and learn how to apply them. Again, this is conducted by the supervisor. Third step is to keep the rule. And the supervisor here is responsible to monitor the workers, audit them to assure compliance with the rules, and provide refresher training on issues or concerns that appear in the way they're doing their work. The workers' responsibles begin with point and say. That means they take a look at the instruction, they point, say the instruction, and then they perform the task in the real world. And they go back and forth between the instructions and the task. And so this is a point and say until it becomes second nature. And that is not a matter of days, it's usually a matter of weeks or months. So this is the step performed by the workers. Check the rule is supervisory responsibility conducts audits of the work to assure the work's rules are applied in a proper manner and that the rules remain valid. The workers check the quality of their own work as part of their Jisoo Kanri, this self-managed system, and it's an approach to zero QC, in other words, taking more and more responsibility as this J-Kotai Kanketsu is realized as they accept responsibility for the quality of their own work, and this is performed by the workers and the supervisors. And the last step is called change the rule. And this is, again, a supervisor's responsibility is to guide a team-based approach to evaluate rules and methods that do not appear to be operating properly. And worker works with the colleagues under the supervisor to facilitate how do we improve these rules for production and the standard work so it can be done in a better way, more clearly, and can we express it in language we all understand. This is facilitated by the worker, and once it's completed, we begin the make rule decision with this new sort of information, and then teach rule, keep rule. So this is called sometimes the 5 R's. It was a process created at Sumitomo in Japan. So we see that there is this operational design of standard work. Developing standard work occurs one step at a time. It uses a trial and error to incrementally define the tasks. So we begin with make the rule, teach the rule, and this is about what we call education and motivation. This is the 5th S in the 5S system, Shitsuke. It's not about just sustainment, it's about education and motivation. Then we have the next steps. It's keep the rule, check the rule. This is the daily management system. We begin the day with Siri Sitan, where we say, let's get ready for the day, let's organize ourselves, let's get ready for the work we're going to do. And Sisu, at the end of the day, we close out and clean up the work so that we're ready to start the next day. So routine organizations are really just do, check, do, check, do, check. As long as there are no issues, we go back to do. We don't go on to act. And so if there is an out of control issue, then we continue and we go to the next, which is change the rule. And this is the 4th S called Seketsu. Now, Seketsu actually means to go to a higher level of cleaning. It's like where we are making something immaculate. We're getting rid of all the germs in the system, all of the biologics in the system. So we're sanitizing the system, not just sweeping up the mess. And this is actually a word that comes from the plant maintenance systems. And the equivalent in the quality world is Kaizen. It's making it better. So it's improvement for the better. And so to change the rule is let's make it better. And then we'll teach the rule and educate and motivate the people. And so this is process QA is happening in the check rule. If we see that there is a problem, the question is, can we actually fix it in the daily management system? If we can, then it stays in this out of control condition. And so we're going to assign rules to create standard work. And this is how that standard work is happening. It's the do check cycle. That's the standard work in the system. Now, we have to develop, if you will, a standard way of doing the work. As Duran said, without a standard, there can be no improvement. We have 2 jobs in Gemba 1, performing daily work. It's doing the work and improving the work. And that's what this SDA cycle is all about. Now, after standardizing, then it's time to improve. So SDCA, we have go through first performing the work and then the process of improving the work. And once a process has been standardized and stabilized, it's time to begin Kaizen cycles of improvement. And this is how we take an evolutionary journey to the limits of the design performance capability. So we start with a lenient standard, and as we go through this, we keep ratcheting up, adding to and increasing the level of performance of that particular process. So as we look at this, the daily management system moves from Gemba 1 into Gemba 2 as we start saying, we have projects that need to be done, more strategic work. So daily management includes identifying and eliminating muda, waste from all the sources, understanding streamlining flow, that's mortar waste, finding and reducing special cause variation in quality and time, improving safe operating conditions for workers, reducing transaction costs in the process activities, foolproofing operating tasks and eliminating inadvertent errors, accepting quality assurance responsibility at each step in the process of work, and pursuing perfection in achieving work capability and capacity. So how do we analyze the standard work? Well, to understand where and how to identify, it's necessary to get a cross-functional perspective, end-to-end of the performance system. And the thing we use is called a deployment diagram for most medium to small size companies. So we talked about a SIPOC map, that is the context of how a business operates. The deployment diagram is a detailed look of how people collaborate inside a process. Sometimes it's called a swim lanes diagram. And so we have multiple roles of people and how their work integrates to contribute to the overall flow through the organization. Then we can add a value stream to that, just like we did to the SIPOC map. And that allows us to show this objective understanding of how the system integrates and creates value or where it experiences losses. And when we link those individual process contributions to the rate of the workflow, we start seeing where are the bottlenecks, where are the constraints. And eliminating constraints in workflow, eliminating quality losses, eliminating inefficient practices and demotivating work conditions by making appropriate resource investments, that's the active management. And that's what has to occur within every organization where we have a managerial owner for those processes. So the second step in the Kaizen journey is to make progress. It's important not to begin on an impossible journey. If you take a look at this drawing here, it's done by Escher. And what you look at it very carefully, you see everybody's walking uphill except that really it appears that some of them should be walking downhill. So how does that happen? Well, it's an impossible journey. So understanding both where you are and where you want to be is just the beginning. We have to understand that the path to the destination has to be planned. It has to be a part of the step-by-step approach we're going to take and a logical journey to achieve the end state. And transition from daily work to transformation activities that reliably perform increased effectiveness requires the intervention of management. Management has to come in and provide resources. It has to allocate funds for making change happen, and it has to integrate these works in IT systems and so forth, and that means a prioritized plan for how we're going to change work. And so if we define these change priorities, which we saw in this Gemba 1, we see Gemba 1 is basically about flow efficiency, but Gemba 2 is going to be about resource efficiency. Resource efficiency is not about Gemba 1. Gemba 1 is about getting rid of mistakes and flow efficiency. Gemba 2 has to apply resource efficiency. So change management, well, incremental improvement is an act of the operational world. Change management happens in the management world. So Gemba 2 is the strategic work of allocating resources to encourage higher productivity in the workplace by implementing breakthrough or transformation projects that create a disruption in the daily work processes. So we've seen the process of management, and one job of leadership is to find and then fund the future organization. Achieving the long-term vision or the long-term goals is achieved by changing the way value-adding work is performed routinely in the organization. These changes have to be part of a portfolio of changes that will eventually shift performance over time. And then the question management must ask itself is a strategic one. what change is needed for us to achieve the future we'd like to have. So when we're taking a look at a Kaizen team charter, we start seeing that incremental improvements are easily managed within the daily management system. This is what we call sometimes lean management. Change management, though, requires resources and cross-functional organizations. And that means that we have to have progress towards objectives. That requires senior management attention. Projects longer than a month in duration are susceptible to planning disruptions because emergency situations occur that mean people multitask and they allocate their time in the wrong way, and that work time can decrease the visibility and cause operational work of organizations to overcome the improvement work. So what happens is there's delay in the improvement activities. Workers then tend to revert to a practice of working harder, longer hours, working weekends, second shifts, and so forth, instead of working smarter by fixing processes to eliminate the problems that exist and are inherent in them. So the potential for loss of focus can be addressed by creating a formally commissioned charter that increases the visibility of change projects and forces the review by senior management on a regular basis. So management says, we need to check and see how well you're doing. So you recognize this is the important thing to do. It's not the death of the many projects that you might feel like are being imposed on you. It's actually, this is the project that is a priority and we have to keep our focus on it. So what's in a team-based action plan? So what do we include in the target? So we have to have a description of the issue and the problem statement. We have to identify what is the performance indicator, what is the current state, what's the goal. We have to assign resources to this, roles and responsibilities, a tentative schedule, and what are the commitments of the various people we're going to assign to the team. And we have to determine who will be the decision maker or steering committee, who will be the financial auditor that assures the governance function is operating and keeps the management attention focused on the change that needs to occur. So commissioning your first project is really what we need to think about. So we want you to think, to get to that level of 8, 9, or 10 in process maturity, how do you do that? By creating your first project. So analyze current state and discover issues that are required to make improvements. Draft those as problem statements. Summarize the project structure in a draft charter and create the plan of actions and milestones that will give you the change. So if we start taking a look at this, what does it take to get started? First, we had to focus on what would be the appropriate management projects for your team to introduce for transformation or breakthrough. What is the shift in end-to-end performance of the business system that's necessary? Evaluate predictive linkages, information intensity, integrity of the data, of proposed KPI metrics to say, do we have data quality sufficient to support informed decisions? And don't make this based on feelings, make this based on people taking a look at the real data, not based on average performance, but looking at the raw data that says this is what actually happens in the Gemba. What should be the targeted information support system to integrate project results into the overall plan of corporate knowledge? Remember, we count projects as complete only when all the recommended actions are accomplished and validated by the internal project auditor, not when we provide a final report with recommendations to management. It's only in execution that excellence is achieved. So relate excellence to execution, and then the check step of the execution that we achieve the level of performance that was indeed our goal. So, are there any last words from our Grand Master Jedi Knight, Yoda? And he says, difficult to see, always in motion is the future. This is a problem that managers have, is that strategy is always susceptible to dynamic change. And how will we get ourselves prepared for that future? We have to have improvement. We have to have change management because the future is always going to be different than what we think it is, and there will always be surprises along the way. So our system of coping with that has to recognize that, as Heraclitus said many, many years ago, we never put our foot in the same river twice. Why? Because changes happen. It's a different set of molecules that are moving there. It's a different set of circumstances in our business. And we have to become alert to what those changes are and how do we react accordingly. Yoda also said, if you end your training now, you will become an agent of evil. In other words, you will have created all the motivation, all of the interest in making the change, but you will have not have changed the organization. So you have to have the dedication. We have to go through not one planning cycle, not two, maybe 3, 4, 5 planning cycles so the organization knows we're serious about this idea of continual improvement of the work that we do. Much to learn you still have, my old Padawan. This is just the beginning. We haven't taught you the structured decision processes. We haven't taught you all of the tools that you need to use or the tools that will be used in the system. We've only given you the very rudimentary steps for reading and interpreting and being able to understand what actions you need to take. So there is still a level of guidance that needs to happen for what you can do, but that's basically should be done in action learning on the job as we make changes to your business and as a system, and that we participate in this long-term visioning of the pathway, if you will, of continual improvement projects to make that change happen. Once we have that portfolio of change projects, then we will be reacting to the changes that we observe, the modifications we make, and the lessons that we learn along that journey. So I wish you well in thinking about these things, moving forward, and taking this journey for continual improvement of your own organization. Thank you very much for your attention throughout this video on this introduction to continual improvement.